Elijah is one of the major prophets of the Old Testament. As a prophet, he experienced God's miracle power in ways that only a handful of spiritual leaders have over many centuries. Elijah provided leadership in a time when society around him was morally bankrupt. Israel's king actively led in ways that opposed the ways of God. The same God who delivered them from slavery and gave them the promised land that they lived in. Now, there are three important characters in this particular text. One is Ahab, who's the king. The second is Jezebel, his wife, who's the daughter of Ethbaal, who's king of the Sidonians. And the third character, of course, is Elijah. We pick up in 1 Kings 16, verses 29 through 31. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, became king in Israel. And he reigned in Samaria over Israel 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. Half a century before Ahab became king, someone by the name of Jeroboam began to rule in the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom was a result of Israel splitting into a north and a south, in part because of an irresponsible leader, Solomon's son, Rehoboam. Jeroboam, when he started the northern kingdom, had places like this, high places where they would have worship. Now, that wasn't something unheard of, because often in Israel's history, they would go to a high place and offer a sacrifice. But this was meant to replace the temple, to replace the tabernacle. You see, when Jeroboam ended up establishing the northern kingdom, he feared that if the people went back to the temple and worshiped, if they kept with the traditions there and all the feasts, they would begin to miss it, and they would want to go back to their former kingdom, reunited. Ahab, 50 years later, is continuing in that same tradition of high places like this. Jeroboam did it for political reasons. Now Ahab, he continues in that, stripping the people of their history and their worship. They no longer keep the feast days. They no longer value what they had before. The law of Moses, it's changing. The law, the 10 Commandments, 10 suggestions, maybe now hardly paid attention to. Ahab not only allows things to continue to be in the past and gone, but he begins to worship other gods like Baal. Now, if you're wondering what Baal worship is, Baal, not as in like farming, it's not a bale of hay, okay? Baal worship is actually about an ancient god who really played into our desires for success. Baal was all about prosperity. Baal was also about fertility, kind of the sensual side of life, okay? And when it comes to Baal worship, it could be very appealing for people to buy into this because everybody wants their crops to do well. Everybody wants to have kids. But you have to understand that Baal worship took things in directions that Judaism, that their roots, their worship system before with the temple and tabernacle, Baal worship, to appease Baal, you could have human sacrifice. There were temple prostitutes. Sex was a part of worship. When Elijah enters the scene, he is entering a scene where people have totally neglected their spiritual roots. And some of them would kind of practice maybe a little of both. Well, we kind of worship God a little, but I want to have good crops, so I'm going to worship Baal too. So when Elijah comes, God is a bit fed up, and God tells Elijah to give a prophecy to these people. The words of this prophecy are found in 1 Kings 17, verse 1. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain the next few years, except at my word." God is trying to get Ahab's attention, and more importantly, to get the attention of the people of Israel who've totally abandoned true worship. They've abandoned God. A little later, 3 years in, famine is definitely a factor. If you don't get any rain, you don't get any crops. And at this point, Ahab is getting a bit desperate and angry, and so are the people. It's at this time that God tells Elijah to present himself to Ahab. Now, Ahab, when he sees Elijah, he calls him the person who troubles Israel. "Is that you, Elijah, the one who troubles Israel?" Elijah's response is, "You've got that backward, king. You're the one that's creating problems for Israel because of the direction you're leading them. These problems are of your making for teaching people to worship Baal." And so Elijah proposes a solution. And the solution is a contest. It is a contest between the Lord God, the creator of all things, and Baal. And this contest is found in 1 Kings 18:21. Elijah went before the people, and he said this, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord's God, follow him. If Baal's God, follow him." But the people said nothing. Time out! The people said nothing? They said nothing? Have you noticed how easy it is to be so nonchalant and we have our divided loyalties when it comes to God? Now, we may not worship Baal, so we think. But we allow things to replace worship and devotion when it comes to a relationship with God. Functionally, you and I can make things equal to or more important than God. And the way we think and the way we live truly expresses what our God really is. What did Jesus say about divided loyalties? He said this in Matthew 6:21 through 24. "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be healthy. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be unhealthy." The words used in the scripture are full of light or full of darkness. But you get the idea. This is about being healthy. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So you might ask, what does this have to do with Baal worship? Well, first of all, let's go to this text and then we'll make the connection. It says here that our eyes are like a lamp. And as Jesus said, and healthy use of our eyes, or attention or desire, can help build good priorities. And we begin to treasure things that truly matter. What are your eyes focused on? Think about this. What do you focus your life on? Is it light or is it darkness? Is it things that make you spiritually healthy, or things that make you spiritually unhealthy? Jesus spoke about being divided between God and money. Well, what does this have to do with Baal? Plenty, because Baal was a god of prosperity. The medium of exchange back then might have been the crop in your field. With you and I, it's dinero, it's cash. And we want cash so that we can get what we want. When you think of worship back then, it was serving Baal so you could get what you want. We do the same thing, only we serve money so we can get what we want. We worship prosperity. And it can involve sacrificing the well-being of others. Yeah, we don't do human sacrifice. But I grew up in the Iron Range. How often has a boardroom in Cleveland decided the financial well-being of people in a small town? And when they took people's pension, and when they took away people's jobs, and they created poverty, which, by the way, gives rise to things like addiction, do you think for a moment that they thought about the impact, the negative impact on people's lives? No. It's not personal, it's business. How do you think that flies before the Creator of the universe? When you and I, in the rabid pursuit of prosperity, don't care who gets stepped on or who gets damaged. Funny, we don't think of ourselves as Baal worshipers. But if we worship prosperity so much that it doesn't matter who we hurt, I think we're Baal worshipers. And you know, when it comes to serving two masters, you ever wonder why you're stressed out? Because you're trying to serve two masters. Whether you acknowledge it or not, we already have a master, our Creator, who owns what He's created. That means He owns us. Is it time to rediscover the God that's so easy to ignore or minimize? It's kind of sad. We serve two masters. We serve one that pleases us, and we still try to keep God in the mix. But there's only one God. And so you need to come to a place of choice. Well, the contest is about to continue, and we're going to pick up in 1 Kings 18, verses 22 through 24. Then Elijah said to him, I'm the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it to pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull, and will put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, He is God. Then all the people said, what you say is good. Now, as Elijah is challenging the prophets of Baal, he also challenges the people concerning their anemic view of God. Elijah forced them to make a decision. Will you agree that the God who answers by fire is God? Well, their response, what you say is good. So now they were forced at this point to acknowledge that, well, I guess the God who answers by fire is God. So now the contest starts. Pick up at verse 25. And Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls, prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bull given them and prepared it, and they called on the name of Baal from morning until noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar they'd made. Now, what began to happen? They started cutting themselves with knives and spears and swords, and the blood was just running. They were desperate, but no fire. The whole time, Elijah's by himself. Remember, they had 450. Elijah has to slaughter a bull all by himself, cut it into pieces, and so he's got an all-day job. But while he's doing this, get this in your head, get the picture as he's doing this, all of this is going on, and as Elijah prepares his sacrifice, he is mocking the prophets of Baal. He's starting to make fun of them. He's saying, shout a little louder. Maybe Baal is asleep, or maybe he's tied up, maybe he's busy, maybe he's on his cell phone, maybe he's on his laptop. Keep it up. Baal must be distracted. Has he taken a trip? Maybe he's on a trip. He did this. He mocked them, and of course, what are they doing? They're more frantic. As the traditional time for an evening sacrifice, a tradition that had long passed for these people because they've neglected God. The traditional time for an evening sacrifice comes, and Elijah simply invites the people to come close. I want you to come close to me. And as they come close, something very, very powerful happens. 1 Kings 18, verses 30 through 32. Then Elijah said to all the people, come here to me. And they came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, your name shall be Israel. With the stones, he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. Are you seeing this moment? You see, the altar was destroyed. Elijah repaired the altar of the Lord. How's your worship? How's the altar of your worship experience? Is it neglected? Is it broken? Have you ever considered that the place of worship in your heart or life might need to be repaired? God brings us to a place of decision, just like these people. Elijah's question reaches your ears, and Elijah's saying, how long will you waver between 2 opinions? God or Baal? Are you going to be like these people? Are you just silent? It says in verse 33, he arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. And he said to them, fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood. Do it again, he said, and they did it again. Do it a 3rd time, he ordered, and they did it a 3rd time. And the water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. Are you getting a picture of this? The God of Elijah is a big God. The Lord is God. God enough that Elijah said, let's just make this a bit more impossible. So the wood is soaked. Everything is soaked. And there is a moat of water all around the sacrifice. If it's going to be a miracle, let's make it just a little bigger miracle. So now, in case you have any doubt, wet wood does not burn well, okay? I tried it with green wood. It's kind of the same thing. I didn't pour water on it. I used gasoline, and it actually worked very well. That green wood burned. I also discovered when you're hitting stick matches at a distance of about, I suppose, 6 to 7 yards, the resulting explosion did rattle the windows in the house, and Bonnie made me promise never to do that again. Elijah didn't use gasoline. He didn't have a mushroom cloud that reached up about 15 feet because of the vapor igniting. Nope. Wet wood. Verse 36. At the time of sacrifice. Isn't that interesting? Just stop for a moment. Elijah had invited them to come close. He repaired the altar, got everything set, and then waited till the appropriate time for the evening sacrifice. It's like a call to worship. The prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed. It was time to open the worship. And here's what he prayed. Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Wow. At the right time, the time of sacrifice. We insist so much in having our way. We want everything on our terms. When what is really needed is to repair the broken worship in our lives and come to God on God's terms. You see, God desires to turn our hearts back to where our hearts belong. After that prayer, look at what happens in verse 38. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate. They fell to the ground before God. And they said, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Well, you think? You think? Man, if I saw fire from heaven fall down and literally burn everything, including the soil and the water, I probably would be saying, the Lord's God. Not a problem. He's God. Did you know it isn't just the fire that came from heaven at that point? Because on that same day, do you know how it ends? Rain. The drought ended. Do you know that the drought and the famine could not end until worship was restored? Your spiritual famine, your spiritual starvation can't end until you choose between God or Baal. God desires to turn your heart in the right direction. You know, over 500 years before Elijah, there was another leader who followed Moses, and his name was Joshua. He was the one who led Israel into the promised land, the very place where this whole amazing event was happening. And Joshua, who led them into this promised land to possess this, said something that was recorded in Joshua chapter 24, verse 15. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors that served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. You know, making wise choices is a part of a healthy faith life. The tension in our lives is always going to be there, wanting to draw us to things that will literally steal our time and our attention away from putting God first in our lives. The slide to Baal worship happened over decades. They started out just by worshiping in the high places, and they didn't realize as they began to neglect the law of Moses where the destination would finally come. They began to neglect their spiritual roots. And slowly, as they neglected those spiritual roots, they began to drift away from worship, true worship. And they were easy prey to begin worshiping other gods. You and I, remember, we don't think that we worship other gods, but that's not true. When we allow other things to chew up our priorities, and God has to take a back seat to our own rabid desire to please ourselves. I kind of come back to the point that we are in a pandemic. And maybe the best thing about this is it makes us think a little bit more about our priorities. So I invite you during this time, maybe God is saying, choose who you'll serve. Make things more firm in your faith life than you ever have before. And in so doing, make the wisest choice you've ever been in your life. The choice, as for me and my house, we serve the Lord. There's some points to discuss and pray about, and I'd like for you to visit those questions right now. If you're in a group in your home or with a friend, take some time to talk and pray about the 4 points at the conclusion of this message. Remember, God wants you to thrive.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to enjoy more by the Vineyard Church, like us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/The Vineyard Church Iron Range. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Vineyard Church Iron Range, or visit our website, www.ironrangevineyard.org. Lastly, subscribe to our e-newsletter to stay connected in this time of quarantine. Do so by visiting our website and clicking subscribe to our e-newsletter on the homepage.